Bible's first murder wasn't driven by passion. It was driven by economics. And the God who watched was complicit. No command was broken. No rule was given. Just an offering rejected. Cain didn't learn violence from the serpent. He learned it from a system that taught him love is limited, favor is earned, blessings are for someone else. In Hebrew, sin doesn't mean wickedness. It means to miss the mark, like a misfired arrow, not evil, just off. But in this story, missing isn't corrected. It's condemned. And the target? God never says where to aim. This story isn't about justice. It's about favoritism without clarity, scarcity without reason, and what happens when someone is told, without explanation, that they are less. I'm Dave. I've been a language and literature educator for over a decade. Welcome to the Literal Apostate. When Cain and Abel bring their offerings, there's no setup, no instruction, no commandment from God saying, "This is what I want." Just initiative. Two brothers giving what they have. Abel brings the firstborn of his flock. Cain brings the fruit of the ground. Both are offerings, but only one is accepted. And the Bible doesn't say why. Cain's offering is called a minkah, a word used all over the Hebrew Bible for gifts of grain, oil, or incense. It wasn't wrong, it just wasn't chosen. Cain brings grain, Abel brings blood, and only one offering rises. Across ancient texts, there's a pattern. The gods tend to favor meat. In this story, that preference isn't explained, it's just enforced. No rule was broken, no correction offered, just silence and rejection. There's no audience, no explanation, just one man, one offering, and a silent sky. He did everything he thought was right, and all he got was ash. God only speaks after Cain is rejected, not before. Not when the offering could have been changed, only once the wound has already been made. And what he says is chilling. God says sin is crouching at the door. The Hebrew word here is avon, a term that doesn't always mean moral failure. Sometimes it means inborn flaw. Sometimes inherited guilt. Cain is told he must master it, but never told what it is or how. Cain doesn't invent exile. He lives in its shadow. His parents were exiles, and that exile was his inheritance, passed down like land they could never return to, punished before they even understood the rules. Now it's his turn. Another judgment, another curse, another sentence with no warning. Cain isn't just punished, he's disciplined in punishment, reenacting the only justice he's ever seen. Divine exile becomes human violence, learned, modeled, inherited. No blood was spilled in Eden, but Cain's story ends with a body. It wasn't the serpent who taught Cain to kill, it was God's grading curve. And Cain, he passed with flying colors. There's no trial, no testimony, Just a question thrown into the silence.
Where is your brother?
When God asks Cain, "Where is your brother?" he answers, "Am I my brother's keeper?" It's one of the most famous lines in the Bible, spoken after the murder. But the question? It had been building long before the blood. In Hebrew, the word is shamar, the same command God gave humanity in Eden: to guard, to tend, to protect. Cain throws divine language back at its source, not in sarcasm, in protest. You asked us to guard, but never told us how. You told us to choose rightly, but never said what right looks like. You kept the rubric to yourself. Cain's question isn't guilt, it's grief, twisted into irony. It's theology collapsing under silence. If Eden was about obedience without understanding, then Cain's story is about punishment without purpose. And when God refuses to explain himself, someone else writes the next verse. Cain's story isn't just about rejection. It's about the kind of silence that feels like judgment. God never says why Abel was favored. He just lets the smoke decide. And that silence, it's not passive. It's a blueprint. God speaks after the rejection, not to explain, but to warn. He says,
"If you do well, will you not be accepted?"
but never says what well even means. This isn't justice, it's a riddle. And Cain still expected to guess the right answer. He missed the mark once. Now, the target isn't even there. Cain missed the mark, but instead of pointing to the target, God just tightens the bowstring. If you do well isn't guidance, it's tension. And Cain is left aiming in the dark. We talked about this on the Eden episode, Kohlberg's idea of pre-conventional morality. It's the first stage of ethical development: obey or be punished. Not because it's just, but because it's commanded. If you missed that episode, pause here. The apple will make a lot more sense. In most creation myths, gods fight to impose order. They slay dragons, divide giants, wrestle the void into submission. It's called chaos kampf, the struggle against chaos. But Genesis skips the battle. No monster, no blood, just divine preference. Cain doesn't see the war, he's handed the fallout. Cain is part of a much older pattern. Across mythologies, divine favor creates a fault line, and brotherhood becomes a battlefield. In Egyptian myth, Set kills Osiris, not just out of envy, but because Osiris wasn't chosen. Set isn't pure villainy, he's a brother left off the divine guest list. Cain's story doesn't name a throne, but it names a favor. And like Set, he takes rejection as a verdict. And what's the price of being left out? A body in a coffin. In these myths, divine favor is always paid for, in loyalty, in sacrifice, or in blood. Romulus kills Remus for crossing a line, literally. The Pomerium marked Rome's sacred boundary. Crossing it was more than trespass, it was defiance. But who drew the line? Who got to say which twin was chosen? Cain's line isn't carved in stone, it's marked with smoke. And once his offering is refused, the boundary becomes blood. Favor here isn't shared, it's fenced, and the cost of crossing it is death. In Sumerian stories, Enki tricks Enlil to seize the May, the sacred codes of civilization: knowledge, law, music, kingship, not earned, taken. Cain doesn't steal, he just loses without knowing the rules. A world where the rules are secret and survival means guessing who the gods favor. In Hindu cosmology, the Asuras aren't evil, they're just not chosen. Their exclusion becomes identity. Rebellion becomes role. Cain doesn't choose violence because he's wicked. He chooses it because he's been told, silently, that he doesn't belong. The divine door is shut. What's left is rivalry, rebellion, and violence recycled as identity. In the Babylonian Atrahasis myth, the gods flood the world because humans are too noisy. Not wicked, not violent, just annoying. Actually, I kind of fucking get it. It's divine overreaction. The gods enforcing boundaries with extinction. Cain doesn't get a flood, but the message is the same. Your God's love has a volume limit. These myths aren't just stories of jealousy. They're survival guides for living under arbitrary power. When gods don't explain themselves, people invent meaning. Sometimes that meaning becomes worship. Sometimes it becomes murder. Favor becomes finite. Scarcity becomes sacred. And sacrifice becomes survival. Because Cain isn't just a name, he's an archetype. The first scapegoat, the first rejected son, the first to offer what he had and be told it wasn't enough. In every culture, someone pays the price for divine silence. Sometimes it's a lamb, sometimes it's a brother, sometimes it's you. This didn't start like a killing manifesto. No plan, no ideology, just two offerings, two brothers, and one silence that detonated everything. The Bible's first murder doesn't open with rage. It opens with a question no one will answer. Why wasn't I enough? Where had I aimed wrong? Cain missed the mark, but the target never revealed. In a world like that, missing isn't a sin, it's the trap. This is spiritual malpractice. A God who chooses silence over guidance, then feigns shock when it ends in blood. The crime wasn't about quality. Cain brought grain, Abel brought meat. Both were valid. Both were minka, offerings. But only one gets the divine nod. And in that silence, Cain learns his first fatal lesson. Favor is a prize. He didn't win. And no one will tell him how to aim straighter next time. Genesis doesn't frame this as worship. It's a ranking, a performance review without criteria. And Cain, he's the one told he failed without ever being shown the answer key. Not every god demanded exclusivity. In much of the world, sacrifice wasn't competition, it was communion. In the Vedic Yugna, ghee and grain burned for the gods, but the fire was ringed by people. The sacred was shared. In Greece, Thusia rituals sent smoke to Olympus and meat to the table. Among indigenous nations, feasts spread power outward. Status came from what you gave away. But in Genesis, one flame is fed, one is ignored, and a brother learns that worship is a zero-sum game, where the target keeps moving. If you do well, will you not be accepted? It sounds like encouragement, But without definition, it's a riddle. Cain isn't corrected, he's baited. God never says what went wrong, only that Cain should have known. This isn't discipline, it's divine gaslighting. Judged by a law no one read, but still punished for missing the mark. Obedience becomes a lottery. The prize is love. The cost of guessing wrong is yourself. We don't need to imagine Cain. We meet him every time someone's told they failed a test they were never taught to pass. No affection, no direction, just the creeping belief that someone else took what was his. That belief becomes identity. White nationalism, incel forums, anti-immigrant paranoia, myth factories, mass-producing Cains who see their pain as proof they were chosen and then erased. They don't see themselves as villains. They see themselves as Abels who never got their flame. So they reach for the rock, or the gun, or the headline. Because in a theology of scarcity, violence feels like testimony. Not justice, not rebellion, just proof. Proof they deserved something more. Cain doesn't kill because he's violent. He kills because he believes the system, the one that said favor is finite, was telling the truth. He wasn't trying to sin. He was trying to survive a theology that made worth a zero-sum game. And so he kills, not to destroy his brother, but to take his place. Because when love feels limited, murder starts to look like a survival strategy. Scarcity was the first sermon. Cain was just the first to believe it. Cain's rock didn't end the story. It just shifted the aim. In Hebrew, chet still hangs in the air. The missed mark, the wound before the wound. The sin of Cain isn't the murder. It's believing the target was worth hitting at all. Survival sounds like mercy, but here it's survival under authority. Life spared? Yes, but on someone else's terms. God says the mark will protect him, that anyone who kills Cain will be avenged sevenfold. A shield? Maybe, but shields can be walls too. Some call this mercy, protection from the vengeance his act might spark. But protection can also be management, a way to keep the story under control, to keep Cain alive as a living warning, an object lesson branded into flesh. It's scarcity theology's final move, keeping the rejected close enough to control, but far enough to never threaten the favorite. Mercy ends when it restores. This never restores. It contains. Cain's exile is just an echo, the same sentence his parents wore. Punishment without correction. Distance without direction. Eastward again. Always east. Exile runs in the family, and so does chet. Not because the aim was wicked, but because no one ever showed them the target. In some Gnostic tellings, Cain isn't the villain. He's the one who wakes up. The mark isn't shame, it's initiation. Proof that he's crossed a divine boundary and lived to tell it. Maybe survival wasn't just luck. Maybe it was a passport out of the God's game and into something freer. Khet, missing the mark, was never about the arrow. It was about the silence around the target. In that game, survival isn't innocence. It's just what happens when you stop trying to hit the mark they never showed you. Which brings us back to the question this story leaves hanging. What if Cain's real sin wasn't the murder, but believing there was only one seat at the table? Eden taught that obedience mattered more than understanding. Cain and Abel teach that competition matters more than community. And both stories agree, silence is part of the design. This isn't just ancient theology. It's the logic of every system that tells you love, success, and worth are finite. That if someone else gets chosen, you must have missed the mark. An apostate reading doesn't just reject the murder, it rejects the premise. It refuses moral economies where favor is rationed, where the gods only bless one child at a time. The real rebellion isn't taking your brother's place. It's refusing to believe there was ever only one place to begin with. Because in the end, he wasn't able to hit the mark. He wasn't able. Remember, an apostate isn't just a heretic. It's an escaped slave, and there's no shame in running towards the truth. Next time, a floating zoo and a divine reset, Noah's Ark and the ethics of genocide.